In tough times, creativity and resourcefulness went a long way. When America was in crisis, these simple dishes, from Depression-era classics to wartime staples, prove that simple ingredients can save people in challenging times. Allow me to guide you through the dishes that saved the U.S. during the economic crises of the 20th century. Imagine a condiment that combines the savory richness of mushrooms with the tangy zing of fermented flavors. This unique creation, known as mushroom ketchup, was a common pantry during economic crisis. Despite its name, it's not your typical ketchup. Instead, it's a fermented sauce made primarily from mushrooms, salt, and spices, offering a complex, umami-packed addition to many dishes. Mushroom ketchup was prized for its ability to enhance the flavor of both meats and vegetables, and it was often used much like soy sauce or modern-day Worcestershire sauce. In fact, it was a key ingredient in British kitchens long before the popularity of tomato-based ketchup we know today. It was especially favored for its ability to preserve the rich flavors of mushrooms, which weren't always available fresh in the winter months. Interestingly, the process of fermentation used in mushroom ketchup was an early method of food preservation, making it a valuable condiment in times when refrigeration was non-existent. While it's a bit of an acquired taste for some, this tangy, earthy sauce remains a historical testament to the ingenuity of our ancestors in creating flavorful, long-lasting food essentials. During the toughest times in American history, the ability to turn scraps into sustenance was nothing short of a survival skill. Enter the humble yet hearty slumgullion, a stew that thrived on resourcefulness. Born from the need to stretch ingredients, it was often made with whatever was on hand: potatoes, leftover meat, vegetables, and sometimes a dash of seasoning if you were lucky. It was less about following a recipe and more about making do with what you had. The name slumgullion likely originated from 19th century mining camps, where the dish was cobbled together from bits and pieces miners could scavenge. The word itself might have started as slang for something watery or of questionable quality, though anyone who's had a well-made version would argue it's far better than the name suggests. Think of it as the original clean-out-the-fridge meal, but with a lot more soul. It was filling, nutritious, and most importantly, affordable. And if someone complained about what was in it, well, they were promptly reminded that beggars couldn't be choosers. Slumgullion was a testament to the ingenuity and determination of those who faced hardship with a pot, a fire, and a whole lot of grit. A dish born of necessity but remembered for its practicality and heartiness. Some dishes make you stop and wonder, who came up with that name? Frog eye salad is one of those culinary curiosities. Don't worry, there are no amphibians involved. The name comes from the look of the tiny pasta used in the recipe, acini di pepe, which resemble, well, frog eyes. Nevertheless, the taste was sweet, creamy, and surprisingly refreshing. This dessert-like pasta salad became especially popular in mid-20th century America, a time when gelatin salads and quirky dishes ruled potlucks. The recipe combines cooked pasta, pineapple, mandarin oranges, whipped topping, and a custard-like mixture for that sweet, tangy flavor. Mini marshmallows are sometimes thrown in for good measure because why not? It's a little bit salad, a little bit dessert, and a whole lot of nostalgia. What makes frog eye salad stand out is its unusual mix of textures. It's chewy, fluffy, juicy, and creamy all at once. Truly a dish that keeps you guessing. And for those keeping track, it's also a shining example of how Americans have a knack for turning pantry staples into something uniquely delightful. Let's talk about a culinary pairing so simple it feels almost too obvious: eggs and butter. When combined into a creamy spread, it's a game changer. Egg butter, an unassuming mix of chopped boiled eggs and softened butter, was a staple born from practicality and versatility. Spread it on bread, pair it with crackers, or use it as a filling, and you've got a rich, satisfying treat. Egg butter has its roots in Northern and Eastern Europe, particularly Finland, where it's known as muunavoi. Traditionally, it's served with rye bread or karjalan piraka, a type of pastry. Immigrants brought the recipe to America, where it found a home as a budget-friendly spread, especially during lean times. After all, when protein was scarce, this combination packed a double punch. Boiled eggs and butter were often kitchen staples, making this dish both accessible and economical. And if you think about it, it's essentially the predecessor to egg salad, only without the mayonnaise. With its velvety texture and timeless appeal, egg butter might just be the original butterboard's trend. Only, instead of Instagram likes, it earned a spot on the dinner table through sheer practicality. Few dishes capture the spirit of thrift and indulgence quite like a warm, wilted lettuce salad. It's a combination that's both practical and unexpectedly decadent. A bed of fresh lettuce, gently softened by a hot bacon fat dressing. If that doesn't sound like a love letter to resourcefulness, what does? This dish traces its roots back to rural American kitchens, where wasting food was unthinkable. When lettuce was abundant and bacon fat was too valuable to discard, clever cooks turned to this ingenious recipe. The heat from the dressing slightly wilts the greens, creating a tender, flavorful base. The addition of crumbled bacon, a splash of vinegar, and sometimes a sprinkle of sugar made it a savory, sweet masterpiece. The magic of this salad lies in its balance. It's humble yet rich, fresh yet comforting. It transformed humble greens into something hearty and satisfying, a rare feat for a salad in those days. Variations of this recipe can be found across different cultures, proving that the idea of combining warm fats with greens is truly universal. In a time when every resource counted, wilted lettuce salad turned a simple garden harvest into a dish worthy of the family table. Immigrant ingenuity often gave rise to some of America's most beloved comfort foods, and this one is no exception. Born from German-American kitchens, Goetta is a hearty breakfast staple that combines pork, beef, steel-cut oats, and spices into a savory sausage loaf. Its roots trace back to German immigrants in Cincinnati, Ohio, who adapted their traditional Grützwurst to the ingredients available in their new homeland. Stretching meat with oats made it more affordable while adding a unique, satisfying texture. Families would fry up slices of this loaf to serve alongside eggs, creating a breakfast that was not only filling but economical. Over time, it became a regional specialty, so beloved that it inspired annual festivals like the Gleers Goettafest, celebrating this humble yet delicious creation. Cincinnatians consume over 1 million pounds of Goetta annually. That's enough to make you wonder if oats might secretly be the city's fuel. What sets Goetta apart is its slow-cooked process, which allows the spices to meld with the oats and meat, creating a flavor that's savory, earthy, and utterly distinct. Sometimes the simplest dishes carry the deepest roots. Take hasty pudding, a boiled cornmeal porridge that's as much a part of American history as the Declaration of Independence. It's a dish that dates back to colonial times when frugality and ingenuity ruled the kitchen. Made by simmering cornmeal with water or milk until thickened, it could be served sweet with molasses or savory with salt and butter. What's in a name, you ask? The hasty part is a bit of a misnomer. While it's quicker to make than a full roast dinner, it still requires patience to stir the mixture into its smooth, creamy consistency. But back then, time wasn't measured by TikTok trends. It was measured by hearty meals that filled bellies without emptying wallets. Cornmeal became the star ingredient for this dish after wheat shortages made traditional English pudding impractical. It was cheap, plentiful, and distinctly American, making hasty pudding a symbol of resourcefulness during the nation's early years. The dish was so iconic that it even earned a shout-out in the 18th century song Yankee Doodle, which references hasty pudding as a beloved staple. Not every breakfast dish makes you stop and ask, "Are we brave enough for this?" Deviled kidneys, a bold and flavorful classic, is one such dish. Originating in 19th century England and embraced by American households with British roots, this recipe turns humble lamb kidneys into a fiery, mustard-laced delicacy served atop crisp toast. The term deviled refers to the liberal use of spicy seasonings like mustard, cayenne pepper, and Worcestershire sauce, which were added to mask the strong, earthy flavor of the kidneys. It was a wake-up call for your taste buds. And for those wondering, yes, kidneys were a practical choice. They were affordable, protein-rich, and readily available during times when wasting any part of the animal was unthinkable. In Victorian times, deviled kidneys became a breakfast staple for the adventurous eater, often paired with tea and a stiff upper lip. Some even considered it the perfect cure for a rough morning after a late-night indulgence. After all, when your breakfast bites back, it's hard to dwell on anything else. Deviled kidneys may not top every modern brunch menu, but they remain a testament to the creativity of cooks who knew how to make the most of what they had: spices, toast, and just a touch of daring. Yep. When Irish immigrants brought their culinary traditions to America, they carried with them more than recipes. They brought resilience, resourcefulness, and in this case, boxty. A beloved Irish dish, boxty is a type of potato pancake made from a mix of mashed and grated potatoes, flour, and buttermilk. It's a celebration of the potato in all its humble glory, and it became a staple for families looking to stretch their pantry while creating something filling and delicious. Boxty's origins are tied to Ireland's rural communities, where potatoes were a dietary cornerstone. The dish's name likely comes from the Irish phrase "Aran bocht tea," meaning poor house bread, a nod to its simplicity and accessibility. But don't let the humble roots fool you. Boxty is rich in flavor and history. Irish folklore even gave it a bit of charm. Boxty on the griddle, boxty in the pan. If you can't make boxty, you'll never get a man. In America, boxty found a new home in immigrant communities, where it was enjoyed for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Fried until golden brown and served with butter or sour cream, it's proof that a simple potato can turn into something extraordinary in the hands of a creative cook. Certain dishes carry an air of mystery, and Limping Susan is certainly one of them. This Southern classic, a humble yet hearty combination of rice and okra, has been a comfort food for generations. The dish gets its distinct flavor from bacon fat, and the addition of onions brings out its savory richness. Despite its simple ingredients, it's a dish with a lot of heart and a name that raises eyebrows. The origins of Limping Susan are somewhat unclear, but many believe the name refers to the uneven way the okra cooks and softens, giving the dish its limping character. In rural Southern kitchens, where food was often made from whatever was available, this dish would have been a common way to stretch ingredients into a filling meal. Okra, a vegetable that thrives in the warm climate, was often a key ingredient in many Southern dishes, and rice was the perfect companion to soak up the flavors. Interestingly, while it may not be found on many restaurant menus today, Limping Susan still holds a place in the hearts of those who grew up with it. Some dishes are all about simplicity, and coddled eggs are the perfect example. This soft cooked egg dish is made by gently submerging eggs in hot water, or sometimes using a specialized cup to coddle the egg just below boiling. The result is a delicate, slightly runny egg with a tender white and rich yolk, often served as a luxurious breakfast or a refined addition to a light meal. The term coddling comes from an Old English word meaning to pamper or to treat gently, and this process certainly lives up to the name. Unlike hard boiling, which can leave the yolk dry and chalky, coddling ensures the egg maintains its softness, making it a favorite for those who prefer a gentler approach to cooking eggs. Coddled eggs gained popularity in the 18th and 19th centuries, especially in England, where they were served to those in delicate health as an easily digestible option. Over time, they made their way into American kitchens, often paired with toast or as a topping for vegetables. Some even considered them the ultimate comfort food, offering a satisfying blend of rich flavor and velvety texture. Born out of necessity, burgoo is a perfect example of culinary resourcefulness in action. This slow-cooked stew has been a staple of Southern and Midwestern America for centuries, often made with whatever vegetables and meats were on hand. Whether it was chicken, beef, pork, or even game meat like venison, burgoo was a way to stretch what was available into a hearty, filling meal that could feed a crowd. Burgoo's origins are debated, with some tracing it back to Kentucky, while others argue it has roots in the southern Appalachian region. Either way, it quickly became a community dish, often prepared in large batches for gatherings or festivals. The process was simple: throw everything into a pot, let it simmer for hours, and stir in love and patience. Over time, the dish became a symbol of Southern hospitality, served at barbecues and even political rallies. Some burgoos are so robust that they're considered an unofficial test of a cook's skills. If you can make a great burgoo, you've earned your place in the kitchen. In fact, there are even annual burgoo festivals where folks compete to see who can make the best batch. With a history so rich, some recipes seem almost woven into the fabric of a region. Anadama bread is one such recipe, a hearty New England classic made from a combination of cornmeal and molasses. The story goes that the bread was named after a frustrated wife named Anna, who, in a moment of exasperation, would mutter, "Anna, damn her," as she baked the bread for her family. Whether or not the tale is true, it certainly adds a touch of character to the dish. The bread itself, dense and slightly sweet, became a staple in New England kitchens. The cornmeal provides a hearty base, while the molasses adds a deep sweetness that balances the grainy texture. It's not a light, airy loaf, it's a substantial bread, perfect for pairing with savory dishes or simply slathering with butter. Interestingly, while Anadama bread is often associated with New England, it is spread across the United States, with variations appearing in places like Pennsylvania and even the Midwest. Over time, it became a symbol of comfort and practicality, reflecting the region's commitment to using locally sourced ingredients and making the most of what was available. Sometimes the most unassuming vegetables are turned into something spectacular, and parsnips are no exception. Grated, mixed into a batter, and fried to golden perfection, parsnip fritters are a delightful twist on traditional fritters often found in kitchens where creativity and thriftiness meet. With their mild, slightly sweet flavor, parsnips provide the perfect base for a savory snack or side dish. While parsnips have been enjoyed since ancient Roman times, they saw a resurgence in popularity during times of scarcity, particularly during the Great Depression, when root vegetables like parsnips were more affordable than other produce. The dish was a way to turn simple, inexpensive ingredients into something flavorful and satisfying. The beauty of parsnip fritters lies in their versatility. While they're commonly served with a sprinkle of salt or a dip in a savory sauce, some cooks even add spices like cinnamon or nutmeg for an unexpected sweetness. Whether enjoyed as a side dish, appetizer, or light snack, parsnip fritters make use of a vegetable that might otherwise be overlooked. Today, they may not be a household name, but these crispy, golden bites continue to remind us that sometimes all it takes is a little batter and some heat to turn a humble vegetable into something extraordinary. Sometimes a meal is all about comfort, history, and making the most of what's available. Hog jowl and beans is just that, a hearty, flavorful dish that combines salt-cured pork cheek with beans, creating a meal that's both filling and rich in tradition. This dish has roots in the American South, where pork was often the primary source of meat and nothing went to waste. The hog jowl, or pork cheek, was preserved through salting, making it last longer and adding a distinctive savory depth to the dish. Hog jowl and beans became a staple for many, especially during lean times. Beans were affordable, filling, and a great source of protein, while the salty, tender pork cheek added just the right amount of flavor. In fact, the dish became synonymous with both Southern hospitality and resourcefulness, ensuring that families could stretch their food supplies without sacrificing taste. This dish has even found its way into New Year's traditions in some parts of the South, where it's believed to bring good luck and prosperity for the coming year. Maybe that's why they say eating it is like getting a taste of Southern charm, slow-cooked, full of flavor, and with a little bit of good fortune to boot. In many kitchens, brown bread and molasses is more than just a meal. It's a comforting slice of history. This dense, hearty bread has been a staple for generations, especially in New England, where it was made using whole wheat flour, rye, and sometimes cornmeal, resulting in a rich, earthy flavor. The secret to its sweetness, however, lies in the molasses, which is drizzled on top, transforming this humble loaf into something that's both filling and satisfying. Molasses, a byproduct of sugar production, has been a kitchen favorite for centuries. In colonial times, it was widely available and much more affordable than refined sugar, making it a go-to for adding sweetness to dishes like brown bread. This pairing became so iconic that it was often served at breakfast or as a side for beans, stew, or other hearty meals. Over time, brown bread and molasses became a symbol of frugality and comfort. It's the kind of bread you'd make when you wanted to stretch your ingredients without sacrificing flavor. And while the molasses drizzle may have once been a sweet luxury, today it's a nostalgic reminder of simpler times. Vinegar pie may sound unusual at first, but its tangy, custard-like filling has a rich history, especially during times when ingredients were scarce. This tart, simple pie, made with vinegar, sugar, eggs, and a few basic pantry staples, became a popular dessert in the United States during the Great Depression. With sugar being a luxury in many households, vinegar was used as a surprising substitute to create a sharp, almost lemony flavor profile, while still giving the pie a satisfying sweetness. The idea of using vinegar in desserts isn't as strange as it seems. In fact, vinegar-based pies have appeared in various forms throughout history, from early American cooking to European traditions. While this pie may not be as popular today, it remains a reminder of culinary creativity born out of necessity. Vinegar pie might seem a bit like an acquired taste, but once you understand its history, it's easy to see why it was a go-to during tough times. The tartness of the vinegar cuts through the richness of the custard, offering a light yet flavorful contrast that keeps you coming back for more. In many ways, vinegar pie is a symbol of resilience, turning something as simple as vinegar into a beloved dish that has lasted through the ages. Imagine a dessert that's made from cow feet. Sounds a bit out there, right? Yet, calf's foot jelly was once a popular dish both in Europe and colonial America, offering a gelatinous texture that was both prized and, for some, a bit of a culinary curiosity. The process of making this unique treat begins with simmering cow feet for hours, extracting the collagen that gives the jelly its signature texture. The result could be either a sweet, fruit-flavored dessert or a savory aspic, depending on how it was prepared. The origins of calf's foot jelly date back to the 17th century, when gelatin-based dishes began gaining popularity in Europe. It was especially valued for its health benefits, as the collagen was believed to improve joint health and aid digestion. In colonial America, it was often served during holidays and special occasions, and at times it was even used medicinally to treat ailments. While it may sound strange by today's standards, calf's foot jelly was once seen as a delicacy, a labor-intensive, time-consuming dish that showed off a cook's skill. Over time, it faded from the mainstream as other forms of gelatin took over. Kasha, made from buckwheat groats, was brought to America by Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. This hearty grain has been a staple in Eastern European kitchens for centuries, prized for its versatility and nutritional value. It could be served as a warm, comforting porridge for breakfast or as a savory side dish to complement meats and vegetables. The magic of kasha lies in its simplicity. Buckwheat is naturally gluten-free, making it an excellent choice for those with dietary restrictions. It's also packed with protein, fiber, and essential nutrients. No wonder it became a mainstay in immigrant diets, offering sustenance through tough times. In fact, kasha was so affordable and filling that it became a symbol of resilience, stretching limited resources into a meal that nourished both body and soul. Kasha's most famous preparation is likely kasha varnishkis, a dish where the buckwheat is mixed with bowtie pasta and often served with onions and butter. It's a delicious and comforting combination, bringing a taste of Eastern Europe to American tables. When money is tight, resourcefulness becomes an art form. Poor man's gravy is the perfect example of how necessity breeds creativity in the kitchen. Made with just 3 basic ingredients, flour, water, and drippings, this humble gravy was a staple in many households during times of economic hardship, providing a savory sauce to add flavor and richness to otherwise plain meals. The beauty of poor man's gravy lies in its simplicity. Flour is browned in a pan, water is added, and then the drippings from whatever meat was on hand, be it bacon, chicken, or beef, are incorporated, giving the gravy its savory depth. It's a dish that reminds us that flavor doesn't always require expensive ingredients. Sometimes it's about making the most of what you already have. By adding a bit of gravy, families could make a small roast or a few vegetables feel more filling, And while it's far from the gourmet sauces we might see today, there's something deeply satisfying about the straightforward comfort of poor man's gravy. Today, it may not appear on many restaurant menus, but in kitchens across America, it remains a symbol of resilience and simplicity. Smoked fish has been a staple in coastal cultures for centuries, and Finnan Haddie is one of the most beloved examples of this time-honored tradition. Originating from the small fishing village of Findon in Scotland, this dish features haddock that's been carefully smoked to preserve it, an essential technique before the days of refrigeration. The smoky flavor of the fish is rich and deep, making it perfect for poaching in milk or cream, which helps balance the intensity of the smoke with a delicate, silky finish. While it's a dish with roots in Scottish cuisine, it made its way to America through waves of immigration, particularly in New England, where fish and seafood were abundant. As simple as it sounds, the poaching process turns this humble smoked fish into a luxurious meal. Some families served it with a side of boiled potatoes or even tossed in a salad, while others kept it classic, simply enjoying it with a drizzle of butter or parsley. Though not as common today, Finnan Haddie remains a nostalgic favorite for those who remember the comforting simplicity of this dish. With its earthy flavors and creamy texture, it's a reminder of how food traditions endure, especially when they taste as good as this. A classic grilled cheese sandwich has long been a go-to comfort food, but some inventive cooks decided to take this beloved snack to the next level by adding a surprising twist: sweet toppings. Cheese Dreams, dish that takes the familiar grilled cheese, a simple combination of buttered bread and melted cheese, and adds a layer of sweetness, often in the form of jelly or jam. The idea might sound unusual at first, cheese and jelly, but it's a pairing that's actually rooted in older culinary traditions where sweet and savory flavors were frequently combined. In the case of Cheese Dreams, the sweetness of the jelly complements the rich, savory cheese, creating an unexpected yet delightful contrast. Whether it's strawberry jam, apricot preserves, or even grape jelly, the sweetness helps cut through the richness of the melted cheese, balancing the flavors. Cheese Dreams became especially popular during hard times when families were trying to stretch their food budgets. Adding a small amount of jam or jelly to a basic grilled cheese sandwich could elevate the meal without adding much expense. Plus, it was a fun way to mix things up with ingredients that were often already on hand. Today, while it might not be the most common grilled cheese variation, Cheese Dreams still have a special place in the hearts of those who remember the comfort of this unexpected yet satisfying pairing. Sometimes simplicity is all you need to create a satisfying meal. This dish, often referred to as egg in a hole, has a humble yet delightful appeal. The concept is simple. Take a slice of bread, cut out a hole in the middle, and crack an egg right into the space. Fry it up, and you have a warm, savory breakfast that's as easy as it is delicious. Egg in a hole has been a favorite in many households, especially during times when families needed a quick, filling meal that made the most of everyday ingredients. The bread crisps around the egg, giving you the perfect combination of textures: crunchy on the outside, soft and runny on the inside. It's like a sandwich, only without the extra carbs and more fun to eat. What's interesting is how this dish has many regional names. Some call it toad in the hole, while others refer to it as one-eyed Jack. Despite the differences, the concept remains the same: an egg cooked in a slice of bread. It's the kind of dish you can whip up in minutes, perfect for a busy morning or a quick snack. Egg in a hole became especially popular during economic hardships, when people needed to make the most out of simple ingredients. In the heart of the South, there's a humble dish that's been served at countless family tables for generations: Crowder peas and rice. These small, round peas, often mistaken for black-eyed peas, are packed with flavor and nutrition. They're cooked slowly with rice, creating a hearty, comforting meal that's as satisfying as it is simple. Crowder peas have a unique texture, firm but tender, and they absorb flavors beautifully. Paired with rice, this dish becomes a filling, soul-soothing meal, perfect for both special occasions and everyday dinners. In many Southern households, this dish was made using what was locally available, and often It was a way to stretch food supplies during tough times. What's interesting is that Crowder peas are packed with protein, making them an excellent substitute for meat, especially during the lean years when it was hard to afford more expensive cuts. Farmers grew them in abundance, and they became a staple for many. In some areas, people even used the peas in other dishes like stews or casseroles, but the simple pairing with rice remains a classic. Crowder peas and rice continues to be a symbol of Southern hospitality and resourcefulness, a dish that reminds us of the importance of making the most of what you've got. In times when food was scarce, resourcefulness in the kitchen was key, and one of the most practical meats to use was rabbit. This simple stew, often made with rabbit meat, potatoes, and a variety of vegetables, provided a hearty meal that could stretch a little bit further than more expensive cuts of meat. Rabbit, being a lean meat, was an affordable and plentiful option for families looking to make the most of what they had. The beauty of this stew lies in its simplicity. The rabbit meat, when slow cooked, becomes tender and flavorful, soaking up the broth and the seasonings, while the vegetables, whether carrots, onions, or potatoes, absorb all the savory goodness from the stew. It's the kind of dish that only gets better the longer it sits, making it a perfect meal to prepare in advance and enjoy later. In some areas, rabbit stew became a traditional dish, especially in rural communities where hunting was common. It was a way to turn a wild animal into a nourishing meal for the whole family. Additionally, rabbit is low in fat and high in protein, making it both a healthy and filling option. While the idea of eating rabbit might raise an eyebrow for some, it remains a testament to how people have always found ways to create delicious, satisfying meals from the simplest ingredients. Despite the prices of white sugar dropping as a whole after the First World War, leading molasses to decline in popularity, they made a strong comeback as the engine fueled a great batch of molasses cookies. People also started abandoning white sugar during the Second World War, and it caused them to look for alternatives for their yearly Christmas baking sessions, and the government was already pushing on molasses for widespread public use pretty hard. Eventually, people saw the value, and the ones that did not have to, because it was so much cheaper to get molasses than any other ingredient. That, along with some sorghum syrup, meant that people could still enjoy a fresh batch of hot cookies and warm milk to welcome the winter. It might not seem like much, but maintaining tiny traditions like that meant a lot to people and kept their spirits going as the days got harder and costlier. Spam and eggs was a classic during World War II, when Spam was not only dirt cheap, but also readily available everywhere. Spam's reputation as one of the heartiest, affordable, and long-lasting meat products made it a perfect fit for the tough times. Plus, its delicious taste spoke for itself. I mean, imagine a salty, processed meat block nestled next to a sunny-side-up egg. It's a match made in, wartime necessity. It originated during the Great Depression era, but World War II is when it became a hit around the globe. Now, let's be honest, it's not exactly gourmet. Spam continued to be popular in the post-war era and became a staple in most American households. While Spam is still around today, it's no longer the breakfast star it once was. Green tomatoes were something people ate really regularly. It was tough to grow much else thanks to all the havoc the Dust Bowl was causing on the environment, and by 1936, it was already a period of long-lasting drought and dust storms. Not exactly the kind of surroundings that inspire a lot of vegetable growth. People regularly were dealing with crop failure, and it meant that lots of families had their sources of food and livelihoods cut off from them. Green tomatoes, on the other hand, were one of the few vegetables that people had no issues growing. That's why they got as popular as they did, because eventually, people would begin to hoard them. You'd make basic things out of them like fried green tomatoes with cornmeal coating, but it was enough to last you through the day. Ripe tomatoes were in even shorter supply, and what was available was either rationed or taken up by people in urban centers. It was quite hard for any lasting stock of vegetables to reach people in rural areas, and it was often those people who had it the worst during the Dust Bowl. So this is a bit of a tricky name to pronounce even when you give it a genuine try, but it's worth knowing about this dish because of how good it is. Ballymaloe Irish lamb stew is something that comes all the way from County Cork, and lamb stew is something that Americans welcome with very open arms. You can particularly find this dish being spread in droves around St. Patrick's Day in any Irish-American community. Whether you're in New Hampshire or Rhode Island, which even today have a pretty solid amount of Irishmen living in them, you're bound to run into a Ballymaloe stew once in a while. Despite how good of a stew it is, with tender carrots, potatoes, and tender strips of lamb, and how simple the preparation is since it relies mostly on the natural flavors present in the ingredients, this dish actually flopped once before. Well, I wouldn't say it was a true flop, but it did fade out of the memory of the general public before too. That was before the 20th century, but ever since then it has been seeing a bit of a revival thanks to social media and Ballymaloe House, which is what it's named after. Either way, this is one of the best recipes to ever come out of a family cookbook. And if you've ever had one while at an Irish friend's home, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Speaking of molasses, they also went really great with some slow-baked beans. Molasses have a knack for adding a lot of deep flavor to a dish, and the fact that these were usually left overnight to absorb all of it made for probably the best baked beans people could get in those times. It was especially popular as a summertime meal. Baked beans were not too hard to get, not the tinned versions because those were still pricey. Once you had some, you would just leave them in water to soften, and then the beans would be baked for 8 hours straight overnight. Making it was a whole day. Literally. But once you were done with the prep work, it was all just a waiting game. And this was one time where being patient really paid off. So jellied consommé is a clear soup set in gelatin. It is made from richly flavored stock or broth that has been clarified, which is a process that uses egg whites to remove fat. So not only does it taste good, but it's healthy too. It's like someone decided to turn soup into a science experiment. This strange soup originated in the UK and has many variations, including double consommé, which is basically the same recipe with twice the amount of meat used. This dish was all the rage back in the day, probably because people thought it looked fancy. But let's be real, it's more like a horror movie prop than a food. Can you imagine slurping up that wobbly, gelatinous broth? I'm not sure my stomach could handle it. And that's probably the reason why we don't see this one on our dinner tables anymore. So, the cabbage was really similar. Basically, during the Dust Bowl, it was mostly a competition of how fast you could grow something and how conveniently you could do it. People weren't bothering with anything that took more effort than it was worth or didn't give immediate results. And honestly, I completely get them. Why would you waste your time on crops that are inherently difficult to grow when even the easy ones are going through so much crop failure? Cabbage was one of those easy-to-grow plants, and it became a national savior for lots of people. Cabbage stir-fry with onions and garlic was something people could enjoy every other day, as most of the core ingredients were things they had already been growing in their backyard gardens or preserving for a long while. At this point, the average American person is still used to keeping their experience with cabbage to just burgers, but the Dust Bowl pushed everyone out of their comfort zone just for the sake of survival. We're going to take a bit of a deep dive into a cuisine that we haven't really explored before. I'm talking about caponata, which is a very traditional Sicilian dish that goes all the way back to the 18th century. It's supposed to be a sailor's dish. Can you believe that? It got that reputation attached to it because the birthplace of caponata was Sicily. There's no specific restaurant or name that's credited with making it, but if you ever went there, you'd know just how much the people appreciate this. The first time this became popular in America was when Mediterranean cuisine and Italian immigrants were mixing together and creating all sorts of new dishes, as well as bringing old familiar ones from their homeland. The best part about this dish for a lot of people was that it gave a chance to a vegetable, which otherwise people just aren't too fond of. I mean, eggplants aren't really the most main course-worthy idea you could think of, right? Pair that up with some tomatoes, onions, olives, and capers and cook it in vinegar, sugar, and olive oil. Make a nice little traditional agrodolce sauce, and you'll get this extremely earthy dish with a lot of complex flavors going for it. Potatoes had more use than just what was under all the layers. Once peeled, people would often fry the potato skins as a midday snack. Nothing would ever go to waste in homes back then, as you must have gathered by now. If they can make stuff out of sausage drippings and drain the fat from bacon to reuse, frying up some potato skins does not seem that out of the box at all. These fried skins were the perfect sidekick to potato pancakes, and the fact that the skins had a lot of health benefits made it all the more appealing. Things like this really helped to keep appetites in check, and that meant that the financial situation of the home would be calmer too. Liverwurst and onion sandwiches were once a lunchtime favorite. Liverwurst or liver sausage is a kind of sausage made from liver, so it was the perfect meal for when no part of the animal could go to waste. There were very limited meats available during the World Wars, and people had to use whatever they could find, including livers and hearts. Liverwurst was often spread thickly on rye bread and topped with thinly sliced onions. This sandwich was very popular in Europe and different parts of South America, such as Argentina and Chile. I don't know about you, but the combination of iron-rich liver and pungent onion doesn't sit right with me. It was like a flavor explosion in your mouth, but not in a good way. I'm pretty sure this sandwich was invented as a punishment, but people really had to make do with whatever they could find back in the day, and this dish was just a result of that experiment. The Dust Bowl was hardship personified. Things like lentil and kale stew were honestly very necessary for the overall survival of people. Hearty greens like that would last, could resist the extreme weather and environment, and were most of all really nutritious. This was a time where you wanted to eat just about anything that strengthened your immune system. It wasn't just the lack of good food that was making it easier for people to get sick, it was also the lack of access to health care. People couldn't afford doctors, and the worst of the Dust Bowl hit all of the slums and rural areas that occupy the outskirts of so many states. This meant that a lot of lower and working class people regularly just ate so that the chances of getting sick were less and less, though despite their best efforts, they would eventually fall sick as well. Lentil and kale stew is as super as a food can get, and I mean that in every sense, but it's not an end-all be-all. What it is, though, is a very hearty stew that works great around the winter months for an entire family. You could spin this around a few different ways for variety, and it would still work, but the kids definitely had a tough time getting used to something like this. Can't really blame them either. I'm an adult, and I still struggle with kale. Bacon. Crackers, sure, they're pretty good even as a typical easygoing breakfast, but what do we really do here? You eat something enough times, you tend to get used to it and get bored. How do you get around that? Well, since the topic is retro dishes, we used to hear a lot about bacon bow tie crackers back in the day. It was something you could find for breakfast or a cocktail appetizer, which is some serious versatility. The crackers were extra crispy since they were wrapped inside bacon and then baked until the bacon itself was pretty crispy. It was the perfect combo, and all they needed was each other to realize that. It was smoky but sweet. It was also savory, but buttery smooth and not dry at all. Dishes that are such neat little combinations like these are often hiding right under your nose, and if we didn't have the imagination of so many home chefs who found these and got them into the public sphere, then we'd be a lot more tasteless as a country. We have had a pretty concerning lack of pies on the list so far, right? Let's fix that by going down memory lane where we can find potato and onion pies, a delicacy that took America by storm, especially in the Midwest. Dried potatoes, sliced onions sprinkled with salt, pepper, and garlic, and you had a pretty killer pie. If by some luck the average household back then had some cheese to spare as well, then some serious fine dining would take place. Parmesan cheese was something Grandma incorporated much later when it became readily available again, but the authentic gritty potato and onion pie of the early 30s was an experience in and of itself. Some dishes just exude an air of comfort and homeliness, like being back in your childhood neighborhood at 7 a.m. on a really sunny day. This was definitely one of those. Meatloaf. Who doesn't love this classic comfort food? But what happens when you get a sweet craving and add a little twist to it? Well, you get meatloaf with brown sugar glaze. Meatloaf is a traditional German, Scandinavian, and Belgian dish, and it is a cousin to the meatball in Dutch cuisine. But a brown sugar glaze? That's where things got exciting. This dish was a culinary experiment of the way days, and it's safe to say it was a huge success. Every continent came up with their own variations of this dinner, and it became a centerpiece at every dinner table. It was basically combining ground meat, breadcrumbs, and spices topped with a caramelized brown sugar and ketchup glaze. What could go wrong with that? Meatloaf is still a staple for most people around the world, but you don't really see it get paired with a brown sugar glaze anymore. It was just a post-war craving, I guess. So if you go on over to the African American community during this time, especially in the rural South, then you'll find that a lot of them were introducing Americans to something new. Black-eyed peas and collard greens were a traditional pairing that was passed down in their community for ages, and it really pulled its weight for everyone throughout the Depression. Before all this mess had started, people weren't really too aware about the benefits of a black-eyed pea or how easy it was to grow. In fact, beyond navy and pinto beans, the average American didn't really think about what else was out there. Maybe the occasional split pea, but that's it. Collard greens still had a lot more of a reputation for being a super healthy dish you should always be eating. But it was hard to get the kids onto that kind of food. The hunger that most people would experience would push people out of their bubbles and have them eating anything available, though. Black-eyed peas were still one of the easiest things to grow, and it was especially popular throughout African American communities, even more so than usual. They had always made a lot of these, but now they were living by it too. Are you a big fan of deli food? Deli meats, sandwiches, loaves, that kind of thing? Then one of the best parts of that kind of eating was the olive loaf. It was usually made with pork and beef plus chopped green olives, which is what it became known for. There was a small, brief period before convenience foods started taking over America, where processed meats were really becoming a thing, and this dish was a big part of that time, which arguably spanned all over the 1940s to the 1970s. It had an extremely loyal fan base too, as this was responsible for many deli counters still staying in business. These days, you could find retro stalls that still do a mean olive load, but the days where this was a commonplace item on the street and something you'd see your grandma cooking up are long gone in America's history. People definitely remember the flavors of the bologna, the ham loaves, and all the amazing dips they came with, though. In Texas, as well as New York, rice with raisins started becoming a really popular dish among the middle class and a breakfast that many children grew up on, especially in Indian American communities, which were sparse at the time, but they were still there every other block or two. It was already customary to eat rice with milk and raisins there, so they brought it to America, and others took note. They were not the only ones to introduce it, though, since Chinese Americans also had their own take on the recipe that led to a more custard-like variant. When people could not afford to even eat rice pudding, they would make their rice and eat it with different kinds of nuts and raisins. The idea spread like wildfire in states like Alabama and Arkansas and the Midwest overall. In Michigan, it was a pretty common choice to use brown sugar and cinnamon whenever available. Creamed chipped beef on toast, often referred to as SOS, was a popular military meal that made its way into civilian kitchens. Now, this one was equal parts comforting and questionable. Think of it as dried beef, reconstituted into a creamy, salty sauce, and then plopped on top of toast. It's like someone tried to make a fancy grilled cheese, but accidentally ended up in the Weird Food Hall of Fame. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's definitely a unique flavor profile. It was also known as fizzled beef and was served as breakfast in many diners across the U.S. during the post-war days. And it wasn't just limited to toast. Chipped beef was also often served on bagels, English muffins, biscuits, home fries, rice, mashed potato, and in casserole. Some people even tried flavoring it with Worcestershire sauce. Yeah, now we're talking. This one's faded from our dinner tables but hasn't been able to escape our memories just yet. One of the other things that was pushed to the mainstream thanks to the Dust Bowl was the reliance on one-pot meals. Stuff like vegetable pot pie with a biscuit crust really made the rounds just about everywhere. It was because it was so easy to pool together different kinds of vegetables to make one massive serving of pot pie, oftentimes more than just for a family. People would basically realize this. If they shared the amount of vegetables and resources they had, they could honestly make a lot more. Community-based ingredient sharing and food preparation once again became a thing. Entire neighborhoods were once again eating together, and it was a big part of how people managed to survive. This pot pie was a one-stop solution to massive amounts of hunger, and often people would throw in whatever kind of vegetables they had in there. This would typically look like your average mix of cabbage, onions, garlic, tomatoes, potatoes, and the rest, but people would try to add in aromatics to get some flavor going too. It was little stuff like this that really helped keep things together for everyone because, on their own, people didn't have the energy to cook big meals like this very often. Hoppin' John is a dish that has some pretty rich heritage. I'm talking about African, Caribbean, and Native American roots that all boil together in the melting pot known as the South, where it first started becoming really trendy. However, the origins of the dish are actually a bit darker than just a happy coincidence that somehow got into everyone's table. Though the people who were eating it happily wouldn't know, it was first created and brought over by enslaved Africans in the American South. It made use of African rice and pork, and yes, the best part of the dish were the black-eyed peas even in those times. Now, as far as the name Hoppin' John is considered, nobody really ever knew where it first came from, or if there was a John who made this dish and brought it into everyone's lives, but the first time this name was mentioned was in the 1840s in a print. If you were down in the South and African American communities during New Year, then you would especially see a lot of Hoppin' Johns everywhere. The aroma of those peas and the smoked pork wouldn't miss anyone's nose, as the scent carried for miles and miles away. It was eaten specifically on New Year's because it was a common belief that eating Hoppin' Johns would bring good luck to people if they ate it to start the year. If you went into any new year with such a good plate of food, I'd say your luck was already pretty good. So maybe it does work? Let's not forget all the times a well-made bacon and onion sandwich made the difference between an exhausting, bland day and one with a warm and welcome surprise. Most people would be real cautious with their bacon, as the days of simply frying up a few strips and eating them as is were gone. You had to make each cut of meat count, especially bacon. While it was still attainable on average, its new prices were not doing anybody any favors. So people would dice up some onions, sauté them until they were that perfect golden brown, and make the bread themselves. Sometimes out of stuff like sawdust when dough would not be available, and there you had it, a perfectly vitalizing sandwich ready to put the spirit back into your tired body. Grandmas had this perfected down to a science, as they seemed to have developed a natural intuition for how much bacon, salt, and onions a good sandwich needed. While we're on the topic of ham, this next dish added a fruity twist to it. Yep, we're talking about ham and banana hollandaise. Sweet banana, salty ham, and rich, creamy hollandaise sauce. Some might call it adventurous, others might call it a crime against food. This dish made a lot of buzz in the 1970s, and bananas have never appeared more out of their element ever since. It was featured in McCall's Great American Recipe Card collection in 1973 and took the world by storm due to its uniqueness. The hollandaise was a creamy sauce, first born in France and was originally known as sauce Isigny, named after a small town in Normandy, famous for its butter and cream. This dish really proves that in a time of desperation, anyone will eat anything. But hey, at least it was memorable. Potato and chickpea curry with rice was a really good combination that was pretty much built for the environment people were finding themselves in the Dust Bowl. The recipe changed with each different area and state, but for the most part, the core mix of potatoes, dried peas, and rice was the same. People would substitute white rice with brown rice wherever they could because the latter was cheaper, and it made sense to stretch your pantries out as much as you possibly could. Potatoes, especially, were a rock-solid friend to rely on for the American people. They were one of the easiest things you could possibly grow. You could make so many things perfect for a large number of people with them, and they were full of health benefits. A side bonus was that they'd really keep you full, but all this should give you an idea. It was almost impossible to exist without having a good stock of potatoes in your root basement. Onions, garlic, a water-based broth, and just thyme and salt pepper were used for the curry. Pretty bare bones, right? Yet to them, that was still a phenomenal dish to come home to. So the next two dishes we have on the list are actually some classics right out of Africa and its many varied cuisines. First off, we have chicken and collard greens pilau, which is just the perfect dish to have if you're aching for something that involves a lot of rice in it. The steamed and boiled chicken mixed with the pilau as a base for the dish gives it an aroma that's pretty much unbeatable. Back in the middle of the 20th century, if you really wanted to experiment with some foreign cooking and tastes, then you would go into African American communities and try out the best of their soul food. You'd have to look around a little for the really nice restaurants, especially if you were in places like the southern parts of America, but nonetheless, people found a way. Pilau itself is also a dish that's extremely common in the subcontinent for many reasons. People use basmati rice for this, which is a little different from the rice you guys might be used to, but if you give it a shot, you might find that it has a more full flavor all around. Also, don't even get me started on how good this is for you. If you're a gym bro looking for a great way to add some tasty protein and carbs to your diet, then chicken and collard greens with some pilau is a pretty flawless place to start. Egg drop soup sounds a little fancier than it is, but have you never had a simple dish that knocked the socks off of you? Just a 2 or 3 ingredient show that really hit home, ticked every box, and left you with a smile? Egg drop soup was a lot like that. It was just diced potatoes and onions, which might get you thinking of the pie we just went over, but this is more like a broth. If chicken broth was there, then of course that was the foundation, but water worked too. Once the potatoes started cooking, you would drizzle some scrambled eggs before adding whole ones. It might look lumpy and score a little less for presentation, but it deserves a solid A+ just for the taste alone, especially if you would pair it with some leftover bread. Canned ham was like the instant ramen of foods back in the post-war days. In 1940, it started gaining traction as the miracle meat during World War II. It was also transported as an aid to Great Britain and the Soviet Union. Canned ham was nothing fancy, which was the best thing about this meal. It was perfect for busy households or people on the run. Plus, its long shelf life was like the cherry on top. Back in the day, this was a convenience food dream come true. No fuss, no muss, just a whole lot of ham. But let's be real. Fresh ham is where it's at. Unless you're stranded on a desert island, I'd stick to the deli counter. We don't need to punish ourselves with canned meat anymore, which is why this dinner has become a part of ancient history. Swiss chard is a leafy green we don't hear too much about anymore, and that was the case back then too. I don't blame people, since its glory days were definitely before the 20th century. But people remembered this little green once again during the Dust Bowl. People would pair this up with white bean soup, which was something that the masses found it very hard to live without. Why? They were a fabulous source of protein, they are affordable, you could even forage them, and these could actually be stored for months. This was a time where people were desperate for protein, by the way. A lot of good cuts of meat were more expensive than ever, and just out of the reach of most common people, while a lot of other kinds of things like nuts and almonds just weren't filling you up enough for the amount of money or time it would take to get enough of them. You had to be really smart with every cent, so people would go for things like white bean soup with Swiss chard. This was a versatile combination that had every pro health-wise on top of being something that could feed the entire family and be made with minimal effort. If you take a look at the history of Brooklyn, you'll find something that was really popular, which was ham cheese balls. These were the perfect bite-sized appetizer to gorge yourself on while you waited for the main meal. A lot of grandmas would have handwritten notes tacked onto family cookbooks about how to make the perfect ham ball, what the ratio of meat was, how much cheese you needed to put in, how much you needed to roll them and shape them before they were perfect. It was one of those snacks that just did well everywhere. In Iowa, too, it was one of the most easily available snacks you could find anywhere in the state. All in all, it's one of the best things to ever come out of the Midwest. And no Christmas is honestly complete until you down a platter of ham cheese balls and make the tray look spotless. Have you ever grown up around these? Do you still remember the taste? It's not something you would find so often nowadays, but the days when it was really everywhere were some good ones. Comfort food in the 1940s could not be discussed without somebody bringing up American slumgullion. This was really hot in the Midwest and the South, mostly by its other name of goulash. The dish has been in recipes and cookbooks since at least 1913, and it would include ground beef simmered in a tomato sauce. It was a dish for nights that you really wanted to make matter, and it was also a great way to keep the nutrition and protein intake up. Think of it as like a kind of casserole, and if you have heard of it before, you should know the 1930s versions were a bit different. These ones involved no pasta or macaroni or cheese. Those would become staples of the dish much later on, and we have grandparents to thank for that too. If you like this video, make sure you hit that like button for more videos like this. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments below which one of these dishes shocked you the most.